Welcome, folks, to Thursday morning's devotions. We're going to be reading Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 8. Then, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim, or fallen ones, were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of his heart was evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals, and creeping things, and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favour in the eyes of the Lord. Amen. The passage we come to consider today it starts in many ways a new section. Chapters 4 and 5 in Genesis the end of them have been building up to this new section when we look at the story of Noah and the flood. But it's a section which begins with great challenges in interpretation. It speaks about the sons of God being attracted to the daughters of men and having children by them. And there has been a lot of debate about who are the sons of God that are mentioned here. Well, there are two possibilities. The first possibility is that people say that they are angels. For example, in the book of Job, that phrase sons of God is used regularly to speak about angels in the book of Job. Jude, verse 6, it speaks too about indeed angels leaving their natural position, and 2 Peter 2 and verse 4 as well. But the problem certainly I have with that interpretation is in many ways is a biological problem. Can angels indeed have physical relationships with human beings and have children from them? And Jesus spoke about how angels don't marry or give in marriage. They don't have those sexual relationships. So I think that interpretation has great difficulties. The second interpretation is that the sons of God refers to that godly line of Seth that we read about in chapter 5. And what is happening is that the godly line of Seth is now intermarrying with the ungodly lines from Cain and from others. And what is happening is that the godly are being swallowed up by the ungodly. Instead of being this line, this remnant remaining of people who are faithful to God, it is being lost. And some of the arguments for that include in Genesis 4 and 5 is that an emphasis on the two lines, and it fits in with that here. And in the beginning of chapter 5, it speaks about Adam being made in the image of God. And then it speaks about Seth being made in Adam's image. And I think that's speaking back to that being like sons of God in that situation. So those are the two main interpretations that are used. And indeed in Exodus and Deuteronomy, those God's people are referred to in different places as God's sons. That's personally the interpretation I think most likely and fits well with what we're looking at here. But the key thing is that the godly were being swallowed up by evil. Just a thing it mentions in verse 4, the Nephilim who are walking on the earth. The word Nephilim just means fallen ones. I think just adds this picture of people who were corrupted, people indeed who were evil in their ways. The King James translates that giants because the Greek version of the Old Testament did that. But the phrase Nephilim just means fallen ones. It speaks of these people in verse 4 being men of renown. It speaks of men who were boasting about themselves, who thought they had a great name themselves and were very quick to share that great name about themselves. So if a picture here of an arrogant, proud people who saw themselves as being wonderful, and yet God's picture is very different. In verse 3, God says that man's time will be 120 years. Now, some have interpreted that man will not live. Generally, people will not live to being older than 120 years old. I think it means it will be 120 years till the flood would come. I think that's what that means. Verse 5, God sees that every intention of man's heart is evil. The good has been sucked out. There's just absolute corruption that has grown among this godless people at this time. And we can see that society can go downhill like that. We can see engaged morality even in our own days. It's going downhill like that. Verse 6 is very sad. God regretted, God was grieved that he had made mankind. He was grieved to the heart, it said. We think of Genesis 1 and God saw that he made and was good. Now God looks and it's not good. And God is sad. God is regretful for what he's made. In verse 7, God says he will blot out mankind and he'll blot out the animals as well. And I think out of this passage is a great challenge for the unsaved, that God will only be patient with you for so long. And you need to turn from your sin. You need to turn to Christ and salvation. Jesus spoke on the days of Noah that the people were continuing their normal practices and then judgment came suddenly. And you need to understand, if you don't repent of your sin and turn to Christ, judgment will come upon you suddenly. But I think there's also a great challenge for Christians. We need to be holy people. We need to be people who are set apart from the world. Paul says, don't let the world squeeze you into its mould in Romans 12. We're to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We're to be a different people. We will be a blessing to our world. We'll be a blessing to our communities, a blessing to our families by being different, by being the people that God calls us to be. May God give you that grace to be different. And in verse 8, we're introduced to this man Noah. He was spoken about in chapter 5. His name means rest, and the hope that he would bring deliverance for the world. And he's a man who found favour in the eyes of the Lord. He was a man who was right in God's eyes. He's a man who trusted in the Lord and walked in God's ways. And this is the hope that we need today. We need godly people who trust in the Lord, who know his salvation, who know his transforming power, who will be a bright witness for a world that needs hope to be found in this great God. Learn from this. Flee to Christ. Be different for Christ. Be different in Christ. God bless.